I'm Scott Al Miller. This is Sam IT, my show where we talk about technology, business, and its intersection. Today, Kris Leslie, who I know in person and many of you may know from our Spiceworks days, asked me to update an older video that I did a number of years ago where we talked about should you be virtualizing your active domain controllers. And he asked for a 2024 update a few weeks ago, which is awesome that he's still on the channel because we've been a little bit dormant for a while, and I'm really glad to be back and producing content again. And thank you to everyone who's hung out and to all the new people. So in the context of Active Directory, the first thing is Active Directory has mostly fallen away. If you're looking at new deployments, the chances that you're going to look at Active Directory is very low, or the chances that you will at least select it. That doesn't make it wrong. It just means that the obvious nature that it used to have 20 years ago is no longer there. Now, the obvious choice is to not use Active Directory, and decades of us preaching that Active Directory was not actually a requirement has finally gotten some hold, and people realize that it's purely an option that they should be choosing based on its merits for their specific use case and not using in a knee-jerk deployment. So because of that, the total number of Active Directory deployments that are happening in the world is fractional compared to what it used to be. That's kind of our starting point. The second piece of the puzzle causing some people to trigger a question or discussion about where to go with Active Directory in the future is the loss of Hyper-V. Now, it's not exactly gone away, and we'll do a video at some point about the Hyper-V situation, but for all intents and purposes, Microsoft no longer offers a production-ready version of Hyper-V, nor do they offer a free version of Hyper-V. Hyper-V, as we know it as a recommended product or as a viable shortlist product, another video we need to do an update for, has gone away. I understand that the technology is still there, but for our purposes, it's really triggering a lot of people to ask what they need to do because as they have known it, it is no longer available. And a lot of people associate the ability or desire or recommendations to virtualize Active Directory and other Microsoft workloads on some platform on the idea that Hyper-V was something that Microsoft was promoting, and now they are not. But that's very misleading. The idea of virtualizing has never been tied to Hyper-V in some way. That in the Windows world, I totally understand why people perceive that, but that is not the case. Even when we're at the height of Hyper-V, it was never the most recommended product. It was just viable at some point as a tertiary option. KVM and Zen have always been the better options for the majority of cases because they gave you more enterprise features, better support, better longevity, as we've now proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, at a better price point without the licensing complications and without so many just overhead problems that Hyper-V used to have. And there's reasons why Hyper-V has been discontinued for all intents and purposes, because it just didn't make any sense. It's in a market where it's not making any money, and there are better competitors that are open source and free, and so they completely dominate the space. Hyper-V was adding nothing to the equation, and other than locking people into the Microsoft ecosystem, it only served as a detriment to Microsoft users, not as a benefit. Anyone who chose it, or worse, were forced to use it by politics within their organization, were left at a disadvantage. And Microsoft took that away so that Windows is forced to run on better alternatives. In reality, they've made it better for Windows administrators once they make the effort of making the move. But that is a trigger for why there is a question about how we should be deploying Active Directory without the option of Hyper-V in 2024. So under the circumstances where we're actually going to be deploying new Active Directory or updating new Active Directory servers, doing new deployments even of existing environments, we should be virtualizing. None of the factors that led us to virtualize Active Directory or any other production workload have changed. In fact, like I said, Hyper-V going away actually makes it easier to virtualize better. So while that was not a factor forever considering not virtualizing, it does actually strengthen the overall virtualization market by taking away lesser options, but not taking away the best options. There's really no case where people should have been choosing Hyper-V. I know that there's a lot of fans out there. A lot of people still deploy it because they're used to it. It has some integration that they're used to, but it's a slower, less stable, less licensing protected option with really no upsides, except for, entrenched deployment options. So anything that was being decided at the time it was being decided really should have gone another direction. Same thing with VMware today. While it's still available on the market, it has not been been a serious technology contender in most deployments for quite some time, and with their new licensing challenges, which was always a major problem for them anyway, but with their new licensing issues and questions around the stability with their new stewardship, we really have a situation where deploying VMware or continuing to maintain VMware tends to be pretty crazy. This is not a product that we would expect anyone to evaluate and consider once they'd looked at the factors around it. But that's really neither here nor there. Our question here is Active Directory, and should it be virtualized? And the answer is an unequivocal yes, you should be if you're going to be deploying Active Directory in any scenario, whether it's on premises, on your own hardware, or in a data center like colocation, or on cloud like Vultr, DigitalOcean, Azure, whatever, it should be virtualized. Now, of course, if you're going to cloud, it has to be virtualized. So that goes without saying. But in the other environments, it should be virtualized as well, even on the extremely off chance that it is a sole workload on a piece of hardware, you want it to be virtualized. Now, always, even back in 2003, we should have been virtualizing it. But virtualization was not as well known back then, and people were very likely to make mistakes with it. It was hard to get really low cost or free options for virtualization. So we give kind of a transition time period between 2003 and 2005, but by 2005, anyone who was doing systems administration should have had enough knowledge of how virtualization works, what the options were, and that there were appropriate ways to be using virtualization with Active Directory and other workloads like Active Directory, which is simply a distributed database. That is the factor that makes virtualization slightly more challenging, only because virtualization gives you some power to do some things without thinking that you need to be thinking about. That's the prescient point. But those are things that anyone who's running a server should be aware of. If you aren't aware of those factors, you really have a data protection problem much broader than Active Directory. I keep moving the camera trying to get farther away from people who are doing construction and making noise in the area where I'm recording, so I apologize for that. So virtualization simply makes sense, really for all production workloads. But in all cases, regardless of whether you're going to virtualize or not, you need to be aware of how your workloads work, how it interfaces with things like snapshots and storage layers. You're always responsible for that, no matter how you are virtualizing or not virtualizing, running, backing up, doing data protection on a workload, no matter what. That being said, long ago, nearly a decade at this point, Microsoft went through the effort of putting real data protection efforts into Active Directory specifically to allow for scenarios where people didn't understand the underlying storage, didn't understand what virtualization allowed them to do, not caused by virtualization, simply made more obvious. All of the problems that people associate with virtualization with Active Directory existed without virtualization, but people mistakenly combined the concepts, and because they referred to some of those things as virtualization, people perceived that as where the problem was. But the real problem was coming from storage layers. So in 2024, virtualization is the only way to approach Active Directory. It should not be entertained in any way whatsoever to ever consider Active Directory on bare metal. And in reality, no production workload should be on bare metal. You can, in many circumstances, consider Active Directory today on the cloud. You could be doing it on Amazon, on Azure, on Vultr, on DigitalOcean, on Linode, any of those that allow for a Windows level workload, or you can do Active Directory without Windows in some cases. Then you can do it absolutely anywhere. That is absolutely fine. Of course, you have some communications challenges when you do that. You need a VPN or something similar like Zero Tier. That is actually a VPN that allows you to have that communication, so that adds some additional challenges to your environment. And generally, Active Directory has fallen away from popular usage in the modern era because it doesn't allow for modern networks without some really hefty problem solving and archaic band-aids to keep it running. So it's not as popular as it used to be. But in any situation where Active Directory is actually appropriate for your environment, yes, you're going to virtualize it in 2024. And without having to send you off to another video to see our short list of virtualization products for small environments where you're going to be running your own, then you're going to want to be looking for production virtualization, which means either KVM or Xen-based, which could include a hypervisor-based hyperconvergence product, such as Scale, that would be absolutely fine. They're based on KVM. Look out for ones that may have VMware under the hood. That does not speak well of the product, so you want to be wary of those. Look for ones that are more flexible and work on things that are more forward-looking and more cost-effective for you, and not encumbered by licenses. Those represent real risks for your environment. So you want to be looking at KVM or Xen products in most cases. In smaller environments where you're not going with a packaged, complete solution with hardware and everything included, like hyperconvergence, then you're going to want to be looking at something like Proxmox in the KVM world or XCP-NG in the Xen world. Those products are free, incredibly full-featured, have just so many options, are so stable, so well-known, and used in so many places today. And honestly, I'm seeing more and more talk of Xen since Hyper-V has kind of had its final nail in its coffin. It's nice to see Xen getting a little bit of traction again, mostly I think because people see KVM as so incredibly dominant and obvious at this point that contrarians, which is often including myself, are looking at Xen as simply a way to have an alternative in the market, even if it's got some negatives overall. But XCP-NG is an excellent product. Definitely consider that. But most of the time, me personally, I'm finding myself deploying Proxmox nearly all the time. KVM, even though I fought for Xen for a great many years, it looks like KVM is probably the choice you're going to want in most situations. Thank you for joining me. If you have a moment, please like and subscribe. Thank you for coming back to the Sam IT channel or discovering us anew. If you are looking to support the channel, you can support me directly by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. I'll put a link to that down below. Of course, if you need to hire someone for virtualization, Active Directory, anything in IT, the company that I work for, ntg.co, I've been with them for 25 years. We are an IT-only firm. We don't resell any products. We don't represent any vendors. We only provide pure IT services, just like an internal IT department would. We represent your interest, not the interest of vendors. Whether you just need advice, some hand-holding, someone to augment your existing IT team, or you need an IT team in its entirety, from a small company all the way up to the Fortune 10, contact us at info@ntg.co. We would love to speak with you. Also, if you're interested in these types of topics, I did write a book in 2021, which it was my huge focus for the year, came out in 2022, is Linux Administration Best Practices. It's on Amazon under my name. Very proud of the work we did on that. I really do think it's a good book, and I do list it on here. In things like this, with talking about the virtualization, while we're talking about a Windows workload with Active Directory, the topics in systems administration are actually generic. Nothing important, nothing like a best practice is really ever focused on a single operating system. So the concepts in this book apply equally to someone who's running Windows workloads as well. So if it's something you're interested in, it would definitely help support me and make me feel very good about the support. Be sure to check that out. You can get it in digital and print copies from Pact Publishing. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you all next time.